So now let's talk about static and non-static variables, or methods. So static belongs to a class, essentially, and non-static belongs to an object. And we'll look more closely into that in the later slides. So first we have on the left-hand side the back class that we had created in our previous video, but I have made a couple of tweaks where we have a static variable y initialized to be 10, and then we have a non-static variable num items, which we have seen it as a field in our previous video. And some other thing to notice is that I made them public, but it's not really important. I just did it for simplicity's sake when we are trying to access these variables. And other things to notice is that I had initialized my static variable here, and I had not done it in the constructor. Anytime you have a static variable, you do not want to be initializing anything inside the constructor for it. I just want to mention that. Constructors are reserved strictly for objects. And then on the right-hand side, we have the bag input class, and we have already seen that we have instantiated a red bag and a brown bag. But I just wanted to let you know now that in this video, what I have done is that the default num items is initialized to be, I think, 3 instead of 10 in the previous video, and I apologize for that confusion. So now what we see here is I have a diagram. So here is the red bag because we have initialized and we have instantiated a red bag object right here. So this is the red bag object, and then we have the brown bag object instantiated here, and then we just have the class bag illustrated with this diagram, which is supposed to illustrate this code right here. And here we're just going to be working with num items. We're just going to kind of forget about the other fields that we had defined. So in this case, num items is going to be 2 because that is the argument that we had given it. And then the num items for brown bag is going to be 3. And because that's what the default constructor had done so. And I apologize, we used 10 in the previous video. And then we had initialized our static variable y to be at 10 according to this bag class right here. So the first thing that we're going to be doing according to this code is that we are going to be setting our num items from 2 to be 0 in our red bag object. So num items from the red bag object, we're going to be setting it to be 0. And what I want you to see is that the num items in the red bag changes to 0, but the num items in brown bag stays the same. It stays as 3. So the num items for brown bag and red bag are independent of each other, and that is because they are non-static variables. And then class bag, the static y just stays the same because we don't do anything with it. And now let's see what happens when we change the brown bag's num items to be 10. So here the 0 in the num item stays the same, but the num items in brown bag changes from 3 to 10, and then the static y stays the same because we don't do anything with it. But now we're going to do something with it. So here what we're doing is we are going to be initializing our y to be 1, reinitializing. But the way we even access this y is different from how we're accessing our num items. Here, because y is a static variable, meaning that it belongs to the class and not the object, we have to get it from the bag class. So we say bag.y is equal to 1. So we have now changed our static y variable from 10 to be 1. And this works the same way with static methods. So here I have a getter and a setter for my static y variable. What I want you to notice is that anytime you want to use a static variable, you must create a static method for it, which is why my getY and my setY methods are static as well. So here in the right hand side, what I have in the bag input class is that I want to be setting my y to be 1. So here I use the setY method, and instead of saying it's coming from an object, we don't say that because it's a static method. We say that it's coming from the bag class. And you might be wondering, when the heck do we use a static variable or a static method? And honestly, it really depends on the situation. And a question that you need to ask yourself is that, can we create this variable or can we create this method without having to create an object for it? But for the most part, I would just say that you will be using objects rather than static methods. The only time you're going to be using something to be static is probably your main method, and that's about it. The less static you use, I think the better it is. At least that's how it was taught to me. And so that's why in the constructor you don't want to be putting any static variables in there, because constructors are strictly reserved for objects, whereas variables are strictly reserved for classes. And now next what we're going to be talking about is JavaDoc.